In the Uptown community on the northeast side of Chicago. There's a community organizing group there called Organization of the Northeast. They worked on a lot of important issues around affordable housing, immigrant access to education, homeless services, whatever the community needs. They were organizing, they were challenging the power structure of the city, and they were changing policies and creating resources. A lot of their model was around leadership development. So it's not we're just organizing to serve you and then we'll move on. When they're organizing with people, they would build leadership among that population of people, and they would become a part of the organization. Well, when I first moved to Chicago in 1997, the reason I moved there was to help start a housing co-op called Stone Soup Cooperative, and happened to be in that neighborhood.
What a great name.
Yeah, we started around potluck dinners, so we carry that forward. The purpose of this housing co-op was to be a place for joy and justice, for people to live together, to support each other's work. If you lived there, it meant that you were working somewhere, somehow in social justice activism. Some people on the local level, some people on the international level. And so it was a dynamic space. We provided space for events and fundraisers and meeting places. And did all kinds of stuff. We started out in a convent building, renting a building from the Catholic Church. So there were 20 of us living in that big old convent building, doing all kinds of stuff that the Pope would not approve of. Eventually, we became very successful. There was a lot of interest in living there. But at the same time, we realized we were moving into a neighborhood that was gentrified. And unless we did something intentional about it, we were just another gentrifying force. We wanted to buy some property. We wanted to be permanent. We didn't want to have to rely on the goodwill of the Catholic Church to give us a home. So we started saving up money, and we started building relationships with Organization of the Northeast. And we started our process. I talked earlier about how we were very intentional around decision making and how we build leadership among ourselves. Well, we brought those skills to the Organization of the Northeast. And we became leaders there, and we helped to develop other leaders in the community. And so when it came time for us to buy our house, we turned to those resources and relationships that we had built around organizing in the neighborhood, and worked together to fundraise to buy our house. And we ended up buying that house in the right photo. And I'll come back to a budget later to show how the money moved through there. But it turned into a symbiotic relationship where the skills that we were learning in our housing co-op we brought to the organizing space. The organizing and power analysis and economic analysis that we were learning in the organizing space we brought back to our co-op and helped tweak both sides. And we didn't do it intentionally. We just all of a sudden we realized we were doing this thing. And then we tried to be more intentional about it after that point. But both of those organizations are still around. It changes over the years depending on who's living in the co-op, how that relationship changes, but there's still a good, strong relationship between those entities.
I forget the name of the first group you were just telling us about.
Organization of the Northeast.
Yes, is that a cooperative?
No.
Okay, so
It's
that's
just
sort of nonprofit structure,
Yes.
focused on leadership
Yep.
development. Okay.
Nonprofit community organizing group. Yep.
So when you left living there and moved to Minneapolis, did you have shares and then they bought back your shares?
Yep. When you moved in, the house on the left, when you moved in, you basically paid a month's rent as your share. And it was a zero equity co-op. So when you moved out, you got the same money back. There are housing co-ops that are limited equity co-ops that allow you to gain a little bit of wealth over time. So maybe you pay $500 when you move in, you live there for 5 years, maybe you get $600 back when you move out. But the next person has to pay $600, and sort of the value creeps up over time.
New York City has a lot more. I'm in a co-op and it feels like a business to me. And New York City, I don't know why, but it's full of co-ops.
Yep, there was some
But
important
you feel like
policy things.
if I pay $400,000 and the market goes up, I'm going to get more back. So it feels more like
That's a market rate co-op.
Yeah.
Those are legitimate, but I rarely work with them. I usually work with limited co-ops so that
Okay.
essentially, and not to get off track too much, but housing co-ops and land trusts and similar cooperative models, part of their purpose is to remove that asset from the speculative market. So if you have a limited equity cooperative or a zero equity cooperative, you have now taken that out of the market. Now you decide what it's worth. the housing prices can skyrocket across the street, can double or triple, and the price of moving in here is the same. And so you have permanently owned assets by the community. And so that's one of those motivators for starting a co-op. We talked about filling a market gap or improving working conditions. One of the other primary motivators is to take assets out of the speculative market, out of the capitalist market, and make it a commonly held asset. Very dramatic and fundamental way to address gentrification.
But it's still owned by the building. I may improve my space, but when I leave, those shares.
It's the co-op.
The co-op.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And depending on how you set up the structure, you can allow individuals to walk away with some of that value, but it becomes a community-owned asset.
Right, that's right.
So I talked a little bit about this. So ONE, they were in Uptown, this diverse community. They had the leadership development, and we brought the low-cost housing resource to them, and communication skills and intentional living ideas to their model. One of the last examples here, Renaissance Community Cooperative down the road in North Carolina. This is the before picture. Actually, before the before picture, there was organizing going on in the community in Greensboro around environmental issues and environmental justice. And people were getting together because of some environmental racism essentially in the community. They needed to organize to deal with some bad environmental space and activities that were going on. They were successful in that. They built some sort of relationships and bonds within the community around working together, around building their community, about taking ownership and control of their community. And then they turned around and they realized, well, hey, we also have this vacant space here where a grocery store was there 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Larger grocery store, had been there for a long time, up and left. It's been vacant for a long time, and so we had this eyesore in the neighborhood. So an outcropping of that previous organizing effort was, well, what do we do next? Here's an opportunity to do something else. Why don't we bring a grocery store to our community? And so the organizing momentum was carried forward into a campaign to build a grocery store. And because of the nature of the relationship building that had been going on, folks very quickly turned to the co-op model to say, you know, we need to own this thing. We need to have control over the direction of our community going forward. And so they organized to create a grocery store there. It was a changing neighborhood. It had become, it was formerly working class white. It had changed to predominantly African American over time. The resources had started to be extracted and pulled away from the community. They were not included in the intentional development plans of the city. And they needed to address that space. Oh, here it is. The Winn-Dixie left in '98, and the area became a food desert at that point.
And it left when it was predominantly black, and it was there.
Yeah, it was a part of that transition of the neighborhood. Yeah. And so they set themselves some goals. So we want to pay people some, slightly better than average wages. We want to create some good jobs. We want to create a business that can reinvest back into the neighborhood. This is where we get to the story of where things are difficult in starting up a new business. This was opening day. This is an exciting moment. We started a grocery store. A lot of folks would put a lot of incredible energy and resources into getting this store there. They got a beautiful store that opened up with a lot of partners coming together and organizing to make that happen. And a sort of a common challenge among business development for folks that have not previously done business development is this assumption that once you get it open, then a lot of your work is done. Now you just have to operate the store. And so they faced this challenge very quickly. And sales were far below where we thought they would be. The challenges of operating were very difficult. They had a manager that did not work out well for them initially, so they had to find a different manager. And so and this is not unique to the Renaissance story. This is a very common story across the country as people are starting co-ops. These are very common challenges that people run into. And so it's the part of the challenge around sales is that when there's no grocery store there, people still eat, they develop shopping habits that bring them to other places. Just because you put a grocery store back in there, it doesn't mean people automatically change those habits that they've developed over the last 10 years. And so there was those elements in there. Another challenge was in that larger facility there, they only took up a part of it. And there's a broader plan to bring other complementary businesses to that same shopping center, and those have not all materialized at the pace that we thought they would. And so they've lost some of that synergy that we thought we would have.
Was it a poor area, so if people didn't have a car, they couldn't go get groceries anyway?
I'm not sure about auto ownership, actually. Do you know sort of how many people might?
Yeah, and like I said, my name's Dave. I worked at a foundation in Greensboro that was a primary co-op developer partner with the group. My wife is actually in the black shirt. She was on the board at the time. We lived right around the corner from the place. Low income, primarily African American community. Why, transportation issues are a huge problem. Bus lines. Yeah, so there's a bus stop at the end of the parking lot. And most of the grocery traffic in the neighborhood went to Food Line, which was about 2 miles, which still is about 2 miles away. And most of the grocery traffic continues to go to Food Line about 2 miles away.
So and I think at the end of the day, I think the store will become successful, but it is a long, slow slog to get there.
But they haven't shut down.
No, still open.
That's good, right?
But it does continue to take investment. It
But
continues
it's
to
not
take support.
sustainable.
It's not sustainable yet. We see a scenario where they can get there, but it's going to be a lot of work. And the reason I tell this story, it's easy to tell lots of success stories, and I think it's important to talk about the challenges and be honest about the challenges so that we learn from each other.
And why do people go to now to Food Line instead of shopping here?
Well, that's what Mark said. I mean, that's where they had been going for 18 years. And those kinds of patterns are hard to break. There's also a lot of research that shows even if you have locally owned food outlets in low income and minority communities, there's an ingrained habit of seeing outside sources as being higher quality. And earlier in your slide presentation, you're talking about making a line item about education and information, because if you don't do it, it won't happen. And I think that, and I'm going to say we broadly, meaning my organization at the time, but also the organizers in the community, probably didn't spend enough time doing broad community-based education.
Yep. Any question over here?
It was there.
Oh, okay.
When did it open?
Was it about a year and a half ago?
No,
Yeah.
it's longer than that.
Was it longer than that now?
This is 2018.
Maybe.
It opened in fall 2016.
Okay, it's about 2 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. One more story, a more recent story, Montgomery County Union Taxi Co-op. Once in a while I get a call from people that talk about, I want to open a bookstore, I want to start a taxi company. These are not good business opportunities. People don't go to bookstores anymore. People don't use taxis anymore. And so when I first got a call from these folks, I'm like, okay, I'll listen to you, but I don't know. But what these folks found is a niche that was not being served by Lyft and Uber: accessible transportation. Lyft and Uber doesn't have a lot of vans with wheelchair accessibility and drivers who are trained to help people do that. A few years back, the AFL-CIO was working with taxi drivers to form a taxi union, addressing various issues in their market. And along the way, the local county government was also recognizing that there weren't enough accessible vehicles on the road. So the county government started to turn to some federal sources to bring money in to support, subsidize accessible vehicles on the road. Simultaneously, the union and the new taxi union was saying, hey, maybe there's something we can do here. And so they actually lobbied and actively organized to designate a significant amount of that subsidy to go to a worker-owned enterprise. So that's where the political organizing comes into play. And essentially gave them exclusive access to these resources to start a worker co-op got subsidies to help buy the vehicles and renovate them and get them on the road. They're just opening up now. They're just sort of starting their operations right now. They came to Shared Capital to complement those subsidies with a small loan to help with the extra costs of buying the vehicles as well. And so they're just getting off the ground, but I think they found their niche, and they can serve that niche. So it's good to understand that. I think I talked about this before. This is just some numbers to think about to show you kind of how money moved into these co-ops and what different kinds of money came in. So RCC Food Co-op had $100,000 in member equity, so members were able to pool that much money together. They were able to turn to $600,000 in grants and almost $130,000 in other donations. The landlord was a friendly landlord, there's a strong relationship there, they wanted to support it, so the landlord essentially subsidized almost $600,000 of those improvements.
Wow.
They found equity investors, preferred stock that I talked about before, for $150,000. Other members of the community provided loans in addition to those grants. And then regular loans that came from our organization and a group called the Working World, some other folks that brought those more traditional loans to the table to assemble that $2.5 million to get a grocery store.
What's a senior loan?
Senior loan is like, if things fall apart, the senior lender is the first one to get the assets to sell them off. And if there's anything left, then the other lenders get it.
In your business, oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, let me get this question.
Yeah.
What's the corporate tax status of the RCC Food Co-op?
I don't remember specifically which incorporation model. Do you remember which incorporation model they used?
It's an LLC.
It's LLC,
Yeah,
okay,
it's
so
an LLC.
LLC.
In North Carolina, we don't have co-op. I was also on the board of the other existing co-op in town for a while. That was one of the 1970s organic thing, and they incorporated years ago under a cooperative association statute that's part of the agriculture stuff.
Oh, right.
It doesn't work. So we didn't do that with RCC. It's an LLC, and then all of the democratic co-op stuff is in the operating agreement.
And it's a taxable entity, so
Yeah.
it pays taxes on its revenue.
In a co-op business model, would it, maybe you both would know this, is it like you should just expect 3 years till it makes a profit or breaks even?
I think most any business that you're starting up, you should assume several years of losses, which means you need to, in your budget, you need to have some of that working capital.
Yeah,
You need to
okay.
have extra money that you're going to use up as you.
Because the
have those
jury's out
losses.
for RCC, it's just part of the startup, that it's
Yep.
not.
Yep. And again, it's the same with a lot of food co-ops right now. It's a really challenging market.
All right, thanks.
For the taxi co-op, they only need to come up with, instead of $2.5 million, they need to come up with a little over $500,000. And a lot of that came in those federal grants and those county grants. And then very small amount of member equity, because their members had very little money and they only have maybe a dozen members. So they each chipped in what they could. And then there were a couple of friendly folks that made some little loans, and then we made a regular senior loan to them as well to help them buy the vehicles. And then for that Stone Soup house, it was about $380,000 to purchase that house. Most of it was a loan. If you're just buying real estate, often significant amount of it will be a loan because there's collateral there to back it up. But we did have our members each purchase some equity, we had some donations, and we had some savings that we built up over the years. That's put towards that. So, it's important to breathe. There's a lot there. We are about out of time. I've been talking at you a lot.
That
I hope
really
this was
good.
helpful.
Thank you.
So I think overall the lesson is do it with your eyes wide open. Be prepared for challenges. Assume the best and plan for the worst. And just remember that operating a not-for-profit, operating a community organization, operating a service center, operating a lot of the things that I used to do more of and we all do, it's very different than a business. And so there is a different mindset, there's a different way of thinking about this stuff that we have to engage in when we're thinking of establishing a cooperative.
I think the discipline is this strong. You just can't get us, we don't like capitalists, therefore we're gonna have no business, or we're gonna have no accountability and
Yeah.
no expectations.
Yeah, those are important tools that have been abused and
Yeah.
used in the wrong way.
Right,
Doesn't
that's
mean we
right.
shouldn't use them in the right
Like
way.
money.
So, yes.
Will your slide deck be online or not?
Yes.
I think I can do that. I'll work with are they putting other decks somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll talk to the folks about that.
That
Yeah.
would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you
Is there a
very
way
much.
that we could follow up with you specifically if you want to do, like,
Yes.
cool, thanks.
Thank you.
You can contact me. Thank you for your time.
Maura, do you belong to the club? I don't. I shop here all the time. I belong. I work there.
I love that.
Oh, they're good. Yeah, everyone's going to say, oh, we have money. Yeah. 75 cents.
It's a great shopping experience. I love it.
It was a book where you had to You're familiar too. I don't know where it was, but I wasn't at Countermount. Hey.
Yeah, thank you. So good.
Now we got signal. Okay. So, hi, friends of JM Pro TV. So we are at the third date of this conference, and we are talking now with Mark. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hello, great, thank you.
And so we weren't able to be in the whole conference and the whole workshop today. But please explain us what this workshop was about.
Well, we were talking about the ways that the cooperative business model can be used to support community development in a sustainable manner. So creating businesses that reinvest in their communities and are also owned by their communities and the people that are affected by the business.
And so we in Nashville, because we basically are based in Nashville, and we have different co-ops. But we in this moment, so we see also the born of different nonprofits. So what is the best way to work collectively? So it could be like a nonprofit, or it could be a co-op.
I don't think the corporate structure matters as much as how people relate to each other within that enterprise and how they own and control that business together. So you can use a not-for-profit structure or a for-profit structure or a co-op structure or even an LLC structure or something, but it's the democracy that you put within the structure that is the important piece.
And what are the most important the points in like for a co-op? So what is the most value? It's just the relationship between the workers, the trust, or there's something more?
Well, for a worker cooperative, it is about giving the workers control over the capital and control over the assets of the business and being the beneficiaries of the business. There's sort of three important questions to ask when you're starting an enterprise: is who owns it, who controls it, and who benefits from it. And the cooperative model is one of the best models we have right now in the U.S. to ensure that the answer to those questions is all the stakeholders and the members.
You were talking about the examples in Greensboro, right? And how a co-op can be a good way, but also it's not only just the beginning; it's the maintenance of that structure.
Yes. I mean, a business needs to be managed and operated on a daily basis. There's no sort of end to the campaign, so to speak. Often in our justice work, we have a target, a campaign, a thing that is the solution we are trying to get to. And when we get there, we can stop that and move on to something else.
And for all friends in Western North Carolina, if you want to contact, you want to know more about the co-ops, they can contact you or your organization?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the best way to?
You can find us through our website at Shared Capital Cooperative, and you'll find me as the Director of Lending on the website.
All So thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much for being on the broadcasting. So we're gonna cut this, but you can rewatch it on our Facebook timeline. Well,
Great,
thank you,
thank
Mark.
you.
Pleasure. Okay. So now we are going to leave, and so we're gonna go to the closing. So and we're going to.
Wow, thank you.